Lighthouse has support for Laravel Sanctum, so if we ever need to get information about the user via a GraphQL query or anything that the user owns, so any of the user's relationships, we can do that as well, and we can authenticate directly through our GraphQL endpoint. Now, to test this out, let's go and create a new query in here. And let's say me. Now that is what we kind of want to end up with. We want to be able to grab the user's name, we want to grab their email potentially, and any other information about that user. Now, of course, if I hit play on this at the moment, we see cannot query field me on type query. It's just because we haven't defined that out in our schema. But we can do that now. So let's come over to our schema and let's close off jobs client and open this up. We can add this down here under our query list. Now, the way that this works is we can literally just say me, and then we know that we want to return a user, so that's the type of thing that we're expecting back, and we can just use the auth directive. That's how simple it is to actually get an endpoint with the currently authenticated user's information. Now, that's not all we need to do. There's a few more things that need to be done before we do this. If we hit play on this, you can see we get null back. Now, that's obvious because at the moment, there's nothing inside of this GraphQL playground to determine if we are authenticated or not. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to use Laravel Sanctum's API tokens functionality to pass down an HTTP header with that token. So the first thing that we need to do is for the user that we have in the database here, generate out a personal access token that we can then pass down in the authorization header under the bearer token. So to do this, we're going to come over to the command line. And let's go ahead and run PHP Artisan Tinker to boot up a Tinker shell. Now to do this with Laravel Sanctum, we first of all want to pluck the user out. So I'm going to go ahead and pluck that out by the ID that we have here, which I believe is 4. So let's go ahead and pull that user in. And now we can use that user to create out a token. So to do that, we just use create token, and then we go ahead and call give this a particular name. Now this isn't actually going to work at the moment. The one thing that we need to do is make sure we have this enabled using the has API tokens trait. And if we import that class there and just take a really quick look at that, you can see that we've got the create token method that we just tried to call. So let's go and just exit out of Tinker just to pull in that new stuff. And let's go ahead and re-pull that user out, use the token command that we just used, and there we go, that has been generated. Now normally within an app you would reference the plain text token to pull this and display it to the user, but since we're working in Tinker we don't need to do that, so we're going to go ahead and just copy and paste this, and let's pull this over and just make sure we store it here for future. Now let's try and authenticate over in our playground using this. Now to use an API token like this within Laravel Sanctum, we basically just use the authorization header and we pass through a bearer token, which is the token that we just extracted out. So we can just copy this, just make sure we copy that properly, and we come over and go ahead and pass that in. Let's go ahead and send this across again, and notice it still doesn't work. Now that's because before we do anything, we need to tell Lighthouse that rather than use standard API tokens or any kind of other authentication, we want to use Laravel Sanctum. So we're going to come over to the Lighthouse configuration under config, and let's go down to the middleware, which we need to update in just a minute. But before we look at that, let's take a look at the guard. So this is the guard to use for authenticating GraphQL requests. For this, we just need to switch this over to Sanctum. Now, much like when we're setting up Laravel Sanctum normally, if we come over to our kernel that we looked at earlier, we set the ensure front-end requests are stateful middleware in the API section. We need to do a very similar thing with Lighthouse, but add this at the top of the middleware just here. So let's go ahead and import that there. Now let's head back over to our playground and hit play, and there we go. So we've now told Laravel Lighthouse that we want to authenticate using Sanctum. We've used Sanctum not in the standard SPA way, but to generate out a token that we can use at least within our playground. And now we can access any information about that user. So we can grab any of the information that we have defined about that user and output it. So if you just wanted to purely use GraphQL to display this user's information, you can now do that using this new me query that we created. So now that we've done this, what we can do is in the next part look at how we can extract, for example, a list of users' jobs. So let's go over and do that next.